We will start out by acknowledging those that at our Traci campus in Fairbanks on the unceded customary lands of the Dana people of the Tanana River. In Nome, we are on the Inupiaq, Yupik, and Siberian Yupik lands. We honor the continued fight for the rights of First Peoples and stand together in solidarity and action. At UAF, we are growing into a socially just and caring institution of higher education. This ongoing speaker series titled Shine a Light, Promoting Conversations on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is designed to encourage understanding, build empathy, and engage us in thinking critically about our worldviews. This series is led by UAF's Northwest Campus, but like all great diversity efforts, there are many partnerships and collaborations. We thank the UAF Department of Equity and Compliance for teaming up with the Northwest Campus to bring this series to reality. You can find the recordings of past presentations on the Northwest Campus's website under the Outreach tab. This link will be added to the chat. This semester, our Shine a Light events are during the noon hour of each third Tuesday of the month. Again, thank you for being here for today's event, and we hope you continue to join us. I would like to now introduce and thank our speaker, Traci Gatewood, for today's presentation on When Death by 1,000 Cuts is the Norm, Surviving and Thriving in the World of Microaggressions and Marginality. Traci Gatewood, SHRM SCP, is the owner of G2 Diversified Services. She holds a Master of Science in Business Organizational Management with a concentration in Human Resource Management and a Bachelor of Science degree in Psychology. Traci is an alumnus of the University of Alaska Fairbanks and a military veteran. Two tenants have guided Traci since her first leadership position over 30 years ago. The first is if the organizations didn't take care of their employees, they shouldn't expect them to take care of the organization. Second, to do their best work for organizations, leaders need guidance and support. These beliefs to start the of G2 Diversified series in 2016. Traci has an extensive experience in human resources management, strategic and project planning, and training development and delivery. She provides services to improve organizational effectiveness and quality for national, state, and local organizations. Her services include assisting organizations with developing or shoring up their inclusion efforts, with a targeted focus on anti-racism. She has guided numerous organizations, including UAF, as they navigate meaningful change centered on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Traci had shared some of her personal journey as a Black professional and business owner through the Rasmussen Foundation's Black in Alaska project. And as a featured guest speaker on Culture-Rich Conversations, a radio show that broadcasts on KTOO in Juneau, Black business owners. Traci is an active volunteer with several community organizations, including Alaska Behavioral Health. Outside of her business endeavors, Traci enjoys time with her family, including her two beautiful granddaughters. Please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that Traci may address at the end of her presentation. You are more than welcome to use the chat feature, but please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A feature so we don't miss them. Thank you. At this time, I will turn it over to Traci.
Okay, thank you, Gwendolyn. Are you seeing my slide deck?
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking the UAF. Excuse me, just 1 second here. Okay, here we go again. Good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking UAF's Northwest Campus and UAF's Department of Equity and Compliance for the opportunity to be February's Shine a Light presenter. Please bear with me as I more fully introduce myself. As Gwendolyn said, I am Traci Gatewood. As you can see, I'm also a Black woman. Too often, people look no further than my gender and the color of my skin. When I was younger and earlier in my career, I accepted that. But now I want and expect everyone I interact with to look beyond the surface of what they see or what they think they see. So I'm married to a wonderful man, Bernard, who is the co-founder of G2 Diversified Services. I am the mother of two, Ashley and Ty, and I'm the grandmother to 3-year-old Violet and soon to be 2-year-old Sahara. I'm an extreme extrovert, I'm an extreme introvert, not extrovert, except in work and professional situations. Even though I shy away from the spotlight, I am a friend and a mentor to numerous individuals. I donate to and am an active volunteer with numerous organizations. And as in my introduction that Gwendolyn shared, I volunteer with Alaska Behavioral Health, and that organization is near and dear to my heart. I'm a veteran, and I was activated during Operation Desert Storm when my daughter Ashley was only 2 weeks old. My undergraduate degree is from UAF. I also earned a master's degree from the University of Laverne. I am a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. I pledged in 1988 while attending Tougaloo College, a historically Black college right outside of Jackson, Mississippi. I began my career in the medical field and then moved into program, business, and human resources management. Before starting G2 Diversified Services, I was the executive director of human resources for the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District. While this is just the tip of the iceberg of who I am, it's an important reminder for us to go beyond what we think we see and think we know about our peers, our friends, our coworkers, supervisors, business partners, or whomever we interact with. So today, I will be sharing how I have struggled and subsequently grown personally and professionally while navigating a world of unconscious bias, marginality, prejudice, stereotypes, microaggressions, and racism. So before getting too far down the road, let me provide a general definition for microaggressions. Microaggressions are subtle, slight put-downs or insults that marginalized groups experience through daily interactions with individuals who may be unaware that they have acted in an offensive or demeaning manner. They are often the result of stereotypes or prejudices that the majority group holds. Microaggressions can be manifested through remarks and actions that are perceived to be sexist, racist, or offensive to a marginalized social group and can have a profoundly negative impact by diminishing the value and humanity of an individual and/or group. Today, I will be mainly focusing on race and gender-based microaggressions because those are the ones that I more frequently experience. People who engage in microaggressions may mean no harm toward the person or group being targeted. They may not even realize that they're making a microaggressive comment or action. Regardless, microaggressions can be very hurtful to the people who experience them. A common theme for racial microaggressions is the ascription of intelligence, That is, assigning intelligence to a person of color on the basis of their race. You are so articulate. The message being people of color are generally not as intelligent as white people. Another theme is the denial of individual racism. I'm not a racist. I have several Black friends. The message I hear is that I'm immune to races because I have friends of color. A third theme is the myth of meritocracy, which asserts that race does not play a role in life successes. Everyone can succeed in this society if they work hard enough. What I hear is people of color are lazy and or incompetent, and they just need to work harder. The struggle is real. At times, it is disheartening and overwhelming to go through life trying to convince the world that I'm good enough, that you don't need to follow me around the store because I didn't come in to steal anything, and that you don't need to run my granddaughter and me off the road while flashing an okay sign to show your dominance. During this presentation, I will share some of my specific struggles, but I'll also share some takeaways and some tips and strategies for navigating microaggressions and marginality in the world of business. So key point one, microaggressions are not small, not harmless, and not benign. The term microaggression doesn't fully capture the action's emotional and material effects or how they impact women and people of color's career progressions. The inclusion of micro in the term minimizes the action's harmful effects and prioritizes the comfort of those in the majority by focusing on their intentions instead of their impacts. Microaggressions are not small, harmless, or benign. They hurt, they assault, and they invalidate. Research supports that experiencing microaggressions can be just as harmful, if not more so, than experiencing more overt forms of racism. Microaggressions have a macro impact as they affect the standard of living of the marginalized group. The behavior might be subtle and not intentional, but it serves to exclude people and pushes them further on the margins. Daily microaggressions create a lurid sense of psychological well-being. They deplete energy, problem-solving abilities, and work productivity because microaggressions are cumulative. People of color and other marginalized groups experience them from the time they wake up until they go to bed, from the time they are born until they die. You are too Black. You will never amount to anything. This came from a relative in 1980 to me. So no one is immune for inheriting racial, gender, and other biases. Everyone, including marginalized group members, harbor biases and prejudice and can act in discriminatory and hurtful ways towards others. I grew up in the Deep South, as you can tell from my accent. My earliest memory is of violence being perpetrated against my mother. The toll on her was significant, and she eventually sought out drugs and alcohol to dull her pain and suffering. When I was 12, my two sisters and I were placed in different foster homes. Eventually, a relative got us out and brought us back together. I'd always felt some of my relatives viewed and treated me differently. However, I was not prepared when a relative said out loud what I had felt most of my life, that I was not good enough. In my family, I had the darkest skin tone, and some adult relatives never let me forget it. Although we were all Black, my family's implicit biases and assumptions shaped how they viewed skin tones. The lighter your skin, that being the closest to white, the better you were and the more likely you were to succeed. In the classic sense, I'm not sure being told I was nothing and would be nothing by my Black relative was a microaggression. It actually felt like a bulldozer to my gut. So, how did my 12-year-old self respond? I didn't. I was a child growing up in Mississippi, and we didn't sass or talk back to our elders. Growing up in a home riddled by alcohol and drug abuse, and then being shepherded to other houses where physical abuse was the norm, and then just having these negative messages imprinted onto me at that young age, that really could have been the first building block to many failures for me. But fortunately, that's not how my story ended. Microaggressions are similar to carbon monoxide. They're invisible but potentially lethal. Continuous exposure to these types of interactions can be sort of death by 1,000 cuts to the victim. The word microaggression was coined by an African-American Harvard psychiatrist, Chester Pierce, in 1978. Although its modern usage can be accredited to Professor Daryl Wing Sue of Columbia University. Whether experiencing 1 cut, 100 cuts, 1,000 cuts, or whether a girl of 12 or a woman of 54, the effects of microaggressions are damaging. They are inherently invalidating, often unexpected, and pervasive. Harmful effects can include a loss of self-esteem and feelings of exhaustion, being cut so many times, you're just bleeding out. They can also damage your ability to thrive in an environment. They can create mistrust of friends, peers, management, business associates, the company, the institution. They can decrease engagement. And finally, they can have you leaving an environment, and leaving can be physically, mentally, emotionally. Sometimes you have to, or feel like you have to stay somewhere, but mentally you just check out, and that's not good. So key point number 2, microaggressions are along a continuum from being very deliberate and conscious to being outside of one's conscious behavior. There are varying categories of microaggressions. The most common are microassaults, microinsults, and microinvalidation. Each type can have a lasting effect on the target's ability to experience belonging or acceptance in a personal, business, work, or school environment. Unfortunately, since the subject is not often discussed, as I stated, some aggressors may not even realize they have crossed the line by showing insensitivity or bias to someone's class, race, nationality, religion, age, sexual orientation, gender, or disability. So let's start with microassaults, which are deliberate and intentional slights or insults that are meant to hurt. They are not unintended. They are meant to hurt the intended victim through name calling, avoidant behavior, and purposeful discriminatory actions. Intentional microassaults would be abusive language, clutching or moving a purse or bag when you're around certain people, or posting offensive signs or pictures intentionally. Now let's take a look at some other things with microassaults. Microassaults are actually quite common, and sometimes the individuals committing the microassault doesn't really understand how serious they can be. They're doing it intentionally, but they don't understand the seriousness. For instance, jokes that mock or degrade a racial ethnic group, Someone who is disabled or gender identity is an example of a micro assault. Normally, the person telling the joke will respond with, "I was only joking." Nonetheless, their bias is manifested in this interaction, and it perpetuates harmful stereotypes. So let's take a look at micro insults. A micro insult is a comment that communicates that the demographic group is not respected, but the target is seen as an exception to the stereotype. It is often seen as a compliment in the eyes of the person who said it, but is actually a direct insult to the person who receives it. The one delivering the micro insult often doesn't even realize that they've insulted the target because of their own unconscious bias or prejudice. For example, if someone assures you that you are not like the negative stereotype of your marginalized group, this is considered a micro insult. In another way, exclusion can also be seen as a micro insult, such as judging a woman as harsh when she speaks with authority, talking over her in meetings, or ignoring her input, despite the same behavior being encouraged when it comes from her male counterparts. So let's look at the third type of microaggression, and that is a microinvalidation. And that's when someone attempts to discredit or minimize the experiences of a person who is from an underrepresented group. For instance, if an Alaska Native coworker is sharing a time when they felt disrespected and you interrupt them to say that they weren't discriminated against, or you start sharing your own experiences to contradict what was shared, that's microinvalidation. Microinvalidations seem to be the most prominent microaggression experienced on a day-to-day basis by marginalized groups. Lots of people will have the experience where they feel like no one is listening to them, or they seem to be invisible in the room. Many of us today on this presentation can probably think of a time when this happened, whether it was at school, whether it was at work, in a business setting, or in our personal lives. So let's move to key point number 3. Experiencing a microaggression triggers a cascade of questions, self-doubt, and uncertainty about how to proceed. I came to Alaska from New York in 1993. I had been in the medical field working successfully as a lab technician for several years. In fact, I ran my own satellite office before we PCS to Alaska. Shortly after we arrived, I was so excited to see a job opening at a local medical facility that fit my skill set and experience. I remember that day where I was preparing my job application and I kept going back and forth between what they wanted and what experience I had. And I made sure that my job application, my cover letter, and my resume was just perfect before I submitted it to who I hoped would be my new employer. I also remember when I got the call for an interview, and I was so excited. I carefully selected and laid out my wardrobe because I wanted to make sure that I made a great impression on who I hoped my new employer would be. But then I soon came to realize that my wardrobe selection really was not going to matter. I was sitting alone in the waiting room with my beautiful copies of my resume, with my cover letter, with my references. This was back in the day when everything was in hard copy. And I remember someone came out, this gentleman came out, and it was clear that he was looking for someone, but apparently it wasn't me. So he came out a second time and he never made any type of eye contact with me. And then when he came out that third time, I remember the butterflies in my stomach when he eventually looked at me with this like frown on his face. And he hesitantly asked, "Are you Traci Nero?" When I responded yes, I still remember how his demeanor changed. It's like he just shut down. And I can get emotional when I think about how I had the absolute worst interview of my career. Not only were my ethics questioned, surely you didn't run your own site, but also my experiences. So tell me exactly how would you run that test? No, tell me again, what would you do? That's been almost 30 years, and I am still frustrated, insulted, and hurt by that experience. To this day, I don't have a definitive explanation as to why the hiring manager was so excited when they scheduled an interview with Traci Nero, to how they came to be so dismissive and disdainful when they realized that the only person sitting in that waiting room was me. Perhaps the hiring manager was just having a bad day, or maybe it was something more. For me, because experiencing microaggressions is so common, at times it feels like every interaction that I have is riddled with microaggressive behaviors. So you may be wondering, after that experience, what did I say to the lab manager? Well, nothing. This was another crossroads for me, as this was another potential building block to failure. I will admit that when I left that interview, I went to my car and I cried until I had no tears left. While driving home, I lived out at Eielson, so I had, a 45-minute drive. I convinced myself that I would not have wanted to work for that employer, even if they had offered me that job. Although later I got a job in the medical field, that interview was actually a turning point for me. It motivated me to re-enroll in college and finish my undergraduate degree. Finishing that degree got me on the path to developing some of the skill sets I needed to ultimately start and sustain the successful business I have today. So what I say to that is, thank you, Mr. Lab Manager, for motivating me. No matter how much success I attain, when I experience a microaggression, that little voice pops back into my head. Did I interpret that correctly? Should I say something? Did she really think she said that she said what I think she said? What did he mean by that? I'm probably overreacting. Oh boy, if I speak up, is this going to hurt more than it helps? Even though those voices can be loud to me and others, I think it's so important to challenge microaggressive behavior when it's safe to do so, because sometimes that self-doubt can shut us down much faster than the actions of another person. So that leads me to key point number 4. When unchallenged, the behavior is seen as unacceptable by those making microaggressions. Microaggressions are subtle enough that they often go unnoticed by those who are not affected. And usually that means, in my case, white people or other non-Black individuals, or in some case, non-females, male individuals. In groups, when unrecognized, microaggressions can really create this isolating and toxic environment. However, even when a microaggression does get recognized, people are often unsure of how to respond in the moment. So later in this presentation, I am going to provide some strategies and tips to help you decide when and how to respond. You are a little Black troublemaker. That came from a supervisor in 1998. So by 1998, I had finished my undergraduate degree and I was working outside of the medical field. I was working for a nonprofit organization in Fairbanks and moving up the career ladder. I had started to notice some anomalies in my program budget that seemed to align with the spending pattern of our new executive director. Thinking I was being a responsible employee, I sent a nicely crafted email message requesting to meet to discuss my concerns. Within about 30 minutes, the executive director came to my office. She didn't come inside, but stood in the doorway. She accused me of accusing her of stealing. She literally cursed me out and ended with, "You are a little Black troublemaker." It goes without saying, I was a little shocked, I was upset, and I was fearful because this was my boss. After she finished, I had seconds, mere seconds, to decide what my next steps would be. So, what did I do? I very calmly stated, "I understand that you're angry, but that statement was uncalled for. If you want to discuss the situation, I'm happy to do so without cursing and insults." And I made sure when I responded to her that I brought my tone down and I slowed down my speech, because if I had responded with what I really wanted to say, things would have gotten much, much worse. Although it was difficult, I was evolving from that 12-year-old girl and the woman who just 5 years earlier was silent. I went from thinking to responding. And my response let the executive director know that her behavior was not acceptable. She didn't fire me, but soon after I resigned and I moved to a different organization with more job responsibilities, higher pay, and more room for professional growth. My new job was another building block that helped me attain skills that continue to serve me well as a business owner. So moving along, this is 2010. Great idea, Bob. We need that type of thinking on our team. By 2010, I was a bona fide and seasoned leader at my organization. I was successfully managing people and projects and continuing my upward trajectory. However, I was still a Black woman, and 99% of the time, that is 2010 and even today, there's no one in the room who looks like me. Although I felt respected most of the time, it did not stop the microaggressions from occurring. Though I didn't address every single microaggression, I didn't hesitate to address them when I felt it was warranted. This particular time, we were all sitting around the table brainstorming solutions to a problem that had vexed this organization for many years. Like everyone else, I was just throwing out ideas. I shared an idea and there was silence. No one acknowledged it, but I didn't think anything about it because it wasn't like anybody was just acknowledging the ideas that were floating around. About 5 minutes later, my white colleague restated my idea verbatim. Suddenly, everyone thought it was a great idea. So, what did I say? I said, "That is an excellent idea. I think you may have missed that I shared that idea right before Bob repeated it." And I said that in a very matter-of-fact tone with no defensiveness, no attitude. But in that instance, there was silence. And that was followed by a chorus of apologies. Bob even acknowledged that he should have spoken up before I did, to give credit where credit was due. And just like the other experiences that I shared, this was a crossroads for me. At this point or any other point, I could have checked out. I could have stopped sharing my ideas, or I could have even chosen to leave the organization. But I didn't do any of those things. I stayed. I continued to grow and learn. I continued to contribute, and I continued to advocate for myself and for others whose voice may not have been heard. So in a perfect world, microaggressive behaviors would not occur or would be extinguished as soon as it's brought to the attention of the individual or the organization. Unfortunately, that world does not exist. So understanding that complete prevention is probably impossible, what can we do? There are three main ways to react when we experience a microaggression. You can let it go, you can respond immediately, you can respond later. So let's dig a little bit deeper into each of the options. So number one, let it go. For a long time, my default response was choosing not to address offensive comments in the workplace. Because microaggressions are pervasive yet subtle, they can be emotionally draining to confront. However, silence placed an emotional toll on me. I was often left wondering what happened and why, and questioning my right to feel offended. There were times that my silence led me to feel as if I was not valued, or in some cases even safe at work, and that I couldn't bring my true self to the table. That as a Black woman, I was expected to deal with whatever was dished out if I wanted to succeed in the workplace. While letting it go sometimes is the best decision, it's not the only choice. Another option is to respond immediately. Over time, I started calling out transgressions and their impacts as soon as they happen. This allowed me to explain while the details of the incident were fresh in my mind of everyone involved. Immediacy is an important component of correcting bad behavior, but I won't lie, it can be risky. Perpetrators might and did get defensive, which left me feeling as if I'd lost control or I didn't show up as my best self. I worried about being labeled again as a troublemaker. I also worried about being seen as a stereotypical angry Black woman. So again, no perfect solution. So in addition to letting it go or responding immediately, another option is to respond later. This approach allowed me to address the perpetrator privately at a later point to explain why the microaggression was offensive. However, one of the biggest risks to responding later is the time lag. Unfortunately, explaining after a delay resulted in the person not fully recalling the incident or appreciating its impact. I recall one time when I brought up an incident later, and the individual asked me, "Well, Traci, if it was so important to you, why didn't you talk to me on that day?" So again, no perfect solution to when or how you react to a microaggression. Only you can decide what's right for you. So a couple of tips in deciding how to react. Number one, discern. Determine how much of an investment you want to make in addressing the microaggression. And do not feel pressured to respond to every incident, but feel empowered to do so if you feel like that's the best course of action. Consider three things. First, consider how important the relationship is to you. If the relationship is important, letting it go is the wrong thing to do. So you can express yourself in a way that shows your care for the other person, but you need to assert your way that acknowledges your concern about the issue. A second thing is to consider your feelings. Microaggressions, they really can make you doubt the legitimacy of your reactions. So allow yourself to feel whatever you need to feel, whether it's fear, anger, disappointment, embarrassment, or some other type of emotion, because any emotion you have is legitimate and should factor into whether you decide to respond or not. And then you also, this is very real, you need to consider how you're going to be perceived in that moment and in the future. Because the reality is there are consequences to speaking up and also consequences to remaining silent. And only you can decide which holds more weight for you. Another thing to consider is disarming the person. If you choose to confront a microaggression, be prepared to disarm the person who committed it. One reason that we avoid conversations about race and gender is they make people uncomfortable and it makes people defensive. So you want to let people know that the conversation might be uncomfortable for them, but the microaggression was uncomfortable for you. So you both need to sit together in that uncomfortable silence while you unpack things that have happened. Defy, challenge the perpetrator to clarify their statement or action. Ask them probing questions. What do you mean by that? Let them know that what they said had an impact on you, and it's not necessarily their intent. Equally as important, or sometimes more important, is the impact. So make sure that you don't just let people brush things aside if they bother you. And then finally, again, you have to decide. And sometimes the decision might be just letting it go for your own mental health. Because if you're constantly feeling like you're at war, the greatest gift that you may be able to give yourself is to let something go. So key point number 5 is learn to practice the pause. It's important to realize that humans make mistakes. You're not what I expected. This came from a client in 2020. So my business has been incredibly successful beyond any expectation I have. We started the business about 7 years ago after I gave my husband the "Your retirement is not my retirement" speech. I've never advertised, so all of my business is based on my professional reputation, both before starting the business and after starting the business. And I work with large organizations, federal, state, across the state, Alaska, Anchorage, Prince William Sound, other places. So it's not unusual for people to hear about Traci Gatewood, but not know who I am because they don't look at my website or see any photos. So in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, a potential client logged on to Zoom, and after a little bit, he said, "You're not what I expected." So instead of assuming that his comment was yet another microaggression, I practiced the pause and calmly asked, "I think I hear you saying you had a different expectation. Is that correct? Could you tell me a little bit more about what you meant by that?" And what he said was, "I've heard that you go hard and you get things done. I expected you to be uptight and super intense. I did not expect you to be easygoing and have a sense of humor." So after we stopped laughing, we talked about his organization's need and what I could provide, and that organization is still a client today. So as individuals, we do need to get comfortable addressing these microaggressions and bias thinking. And you can take different approaches. You can take the call out approach, or you can take the call in approach. The call out approach is very appropriate if you need to stop someone in their tracks and just let them know that their actions are not acceptable. Whereas the call in approach is more appropriate when we're seeking to really understand where a person is coming from. We're trying to reach across and bridge the divide of our differences. So sometimes you may need to mix it up and do a call out followed by a call in. So my last point here is it's important to find your voice and know your worth. So when you're a woman or a minority, speaking up can be very, very difficult. And I know we are getting short on time, so I'm just going to highlight a few points here. So number one is learn to let go of being liked. As women, sometimes it's important for us to feel like we're liked, but being liked at the expense of giving up who you are and what your value is not worth it. You want to think through what you want to say and when, because what you say is important, but how you say it is equally important. So if there's a time where you feel like you can give yourself some latitude to think through, practice what you're going to say. Don't try to necessarily soften the words, but don't feel like you have to punch someone in the throat in order to get your point across. And practice it. Practice your dialogue. And don't, try to lessen like I think or or ah. Just be direct and to the point. Again, be deliberate in your tone and the delivery of your message. Choose the right time to deliver the message. If you're feeling angry and upset, that may not be the most appropriate time, because you're going to come from a place of emotion, and then that person can turn it around and it becomes about you being angry instead of what action they took. Don't compromise your values. I know as a business owner, I can choose not to work with particular clients. And some people may feel like, well, that's great for you, Traci, but I need to eat. I truly believe if you're in a place where people don't value you, there are places out there that value your voice and what you can bring. So work to find them. Build strategic relationships. There are many people who want to really be allies, and they can be, people who are in traditionally marginalized groups. They can be individuals who are in the majority, but seek out people who believe in you and who want to help you to succeed. For me, one of the things, regardless of my work with different clients or what I'm doing, because DEI work is a very small part of my business, I always highlight the business case for diversity inclusion, for building and sustaining a diverse and truly inclusive work environment. And I feel like my clients appreciate the voice that I bring to the table. And then again, walk away. If people cannot value you for who you are, walk away from that negativity. I'm not saying just up and quit, but work to build yourself up, build your skills, use those strategic relationships and partnerships to find a place that that values you. And then if you are working to be an ally, and just be comfortable in, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. What's important when you're trying to be an ally is that you use your voice to elevate those that are being pushed to the margins, who you see the microaggressive behaviors. So make sure that you don't just decide, hey, I have mine, and everybody else, if they work hard enough, they're going to get theirs, because that's not necessarily the world that we live in. So I've come a long way from the 12-year-old girl receiving messages to diminish and destroy my self-worth. I know that every day I will have to choose how I interact with the world and forever be ready to stand up for myself and others. Though it's challenging, it's also rewarding because I know that there are many people who value me, my work, and what I bring to the table. At the end of last year, out of the blue, I received an email from a former client, and this is the email. This is just a quick note to let you know that the work you did with our organization a couple of years ago has had a lasting impact. In particular, you may recall the creation of our team norms. I suspect this is something you commonly lead your clients through, but the impact of this one has been remarkable. I must admit that it felt good to be seen, heard, and understood while being a Black woman in the world of business. So today I will end with one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Traci, for being here today. We are now going to address questions that came in during the presentation. Somebody had a comment. Thank you very much for the explanation of your title. Hearing it validates the fact that I, as a woman of color, am not too sensitive or too reactive when I feel cut. And then a question, do you think that for some people it might be spiritually safer and less damaging to not see the microaggression?
Yes, I do. It is hard work when you feel like you are being singled out or you're being marginalized. So some people, including me in my lifetime, I won't lie, I won't shy away from it. I convinced myself that that just didn't happen, or, the world is perfect, or I'm being too sensitive.
Thank you. What general advice do you have for white folks and when their friends of color share that they've experienced a microaggression? How do we support and comfort them in a meaningful way? What actions are helpful?
So I think one of the first things is just acknowledging and not minimizing what your friend is sharing. Sometimes just sitting in silence, asking a person what they need, what would be most helpful, not expecting your friend to take on all of your education around microaggressions or unconscious bias, doing some work on your own. There's a lot of resources out there. If you just Google microaggressions, you can find a whole list of things that you can do as an ally to support your friends or peers or colleagues.
Okay. What do you think about people who've experienced microaggressions, needing to, wanting to respond, react in ways that emphasize caring for the aggressor's feelings?
Can you repeat the first part?
What do you think about people who've experienced microaggressions, needing to, or wanting to respond, react in ways that emphasize caring for the aggressor's feelings?
Well, so for me, I feel like when you bring negative energy, you get negative energy. And I practice the pause quite a bit, and the pause gives me an opportunity to check in with myself, because if I come back with a very nasty, snarky attitude, then that person is not going to focus on what I'm trying to say. They're going to focus on my attitude. But I am very comfortable in being very matter of fact and direct when confronting microaggressions. It's like, excuse me, can you tell me more about that? What I think I heard you say is X, Y, Z, or that's not acceptable. You may not know this, but when you say this, this is the impact it has on me. And I've had people try to argue their point, and I'm not interested at a deeper level on what their intent was. Intent is good because it allows me to know they didn't have negative intent, but I also need them to understand the impact and not just focus on what they intended.
Somebody said, "Thank you very much for finding your voice actions. They are very wise. Will we have access to these slides later?"
Yes.
Okay. Another person says, "On the flip side of challenging microaggressions, do you have any recommendations for responding gracefully if you were informed by someone that you have said/done something offensive or hurtful, rather than saying, 'I didn't mean to'?"
Yeah, an apology, a sincere apology. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that that was a microaggression. Can you share more with me about what impact that had on you? So, in I think it's natural to be defensive when we feel challenged, but rather than going on the offense, invite the person in, because again, it's not intent, it's impact. So focus on, that's not, I wasn't trying to do that. I am sorry, and let's talk about it. Invite them in.
Okay, another question was, how can we as a university institution help prevent microaggressions or marginalization from taking place on UAF campus?
Well, have been working, doing some work with UAF, and certainly the Shine a Light presentation or presentations that you're doing. Education, I think, is key. I think leadership is key, starting at the top, and making it clear that this type of behavior is not acceptable. But awareness is one of those first steps, because like I said in the presentation, oftentimes people don't even realize that they are doing microaggressive behaviors or making micro or aggressive comments. So you have to educate people, and people have to have environments where they are comfortable talking about things and learning and relearning. And then just the reality of, we didn't get here in 1 year, 5 years, 100 years. We have to commit to this forever. It's forever work. So it can't be a flavor of the month. We have to keep working every day and be diligent about educating ourselves and others.
Okay, another person says, there are situations where directly interrupting a microaggression would be dangerous or unwise. Are things like checking in with the person who was microaggressed, if you know this person, or sharing, "Wow, what that person did was not acceptable. Look with them," if they're a stranger on the street, helpful?
It can be, and there's no one size fits all for any approach. So you have to make a judgment call in the moment. So it can be, or some people may feel like that's, that further harms them. So as individuals, it's just get as many tools in your toolbox, so when the time comes, you can figure out what's going to be the best approach. And if you approach someone and it's apparent that they are not receptive, just back away and keep going. But if you do approach someone and they really needed that, that can make the difference between them just wanting to give up today or deciding that, hey, I can keep fighting the good fight and move on until tomorrow.
Another person asks, what do you think? Oh, that we already answered that question. Sorry. Somebody says, "Thank you, Traci, for sharing your experiences and guidance. You are so clear and helpful." And then another person asks, "Shouldn't we just call microaggressions what they are, racism, sexism, etc.? Do you think that using the term microaggressions minimalizes the impacts of biased words, actions, or behaviors?"
Well, yes, I think that micro does, the terminology is a good term, but the micro in microaggressions does seem to minimize the impact. And I think what's happened with the range from micro assaults, which is overt racism, to micro invalidations, that there's been some attempt to try to clarify that they're not micro. What it is really, it's exclusionary behavior. It's selective exclusionary behavior. So whether you call it a microaggression, whether you call it racism, whether you call it exclusionary behavior, it needs to stop. And no one should think that a microaggression is something that has no impact, because even I've had "you're just so articulate." For me, it's like nails on a chalkboard. And I know that the person who was saying that to me meant no harm, but yet it still cut me. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Traci, for answering these questions. Thank you for joining us today. Please keep an eye out for upcoming Shine a Light presentations at nwc.uaf.edu or facebook.com/uaf.nwc. If you would like to share the recording or give us feedback, you can do so by visiting the Outreach tab at nwc.uaf.edu. We will now be closing out the webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Traci.
Thank you for having me. It's like, oh my gosh, suddenly time was gone.
All right. Thanks so much, Traci.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.